So can you tell us a bit about how you approach developing some of these characters, and the types of narrative decisions that you make to bring them to life and create that sense of attachment on the part of the reader?
Well, one of the things that I love about the form of the short story is that it's really a like in media res uh, kind of medium. It's almost like, and I often think of it akin to poetry, right? Where you really every word counts,
Yeah.
and that's really how I've always wanted to use it as well. I mean, that has its, almost to like if you get a critique as a short story writer, that people say, oh, it ended too soon, just when I was getting into it. And so in a way you have to, I mean, just as one has to train oneself to write, to write a short story, you almost have to train yourself also to read a short story. And the book was recently chosen for Reese's book club, and then I had to write a note because it was the first time they had chosen a short story collection, and I felt like I really have to guide folks through this because if you're used to reading novels, and sometimes first short stories can be frustrating, but I see it as kind of akin to, like, I'd read this somewhere, and I about a short story being like a really powerful painting,
Mhm.
and while you're standing there looking at this extraordinary work of art, you think, you're completely absorbed, like, think of the great works that you love, works of art, you're looking at it, you're absorbed, and then something else happens right after that image, especially in historical paintings, right? And then you look, something else happens right before, but you're so involved in what's happening in the image that you're looking at. I think of something like a really dense Delacroix, like, where you're like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, is that? And Toni Morrison did a whole talk on, I'm forgetting the name of the painter now, but on this one painting with, like, and where she was in residence at the Louvre, where she took us in front of the painting, like, and so there was a whole month built around this notion of the foreigner at home that she sort of extracted out of that image. So I think of a short story like that, and I say to people too, it's like, and also it's like taking a tour of a really big house where people are waiting in different rooms to talk to you, and so and you're not. It's like, once the story's over, you have to move into another room, and I guess for the young people, it would be like a kind of speed dating.
Yeah.
But there's something, I would think, like, with the attention span that people have these days, like, for me, I've always loved short stories for that you can sit down, read one, and I never read a short story book like back to back. Like, I read one story, I walk around, I pause, and I just, like, I can absorb each one of them, just like you would with poetry. And so, but the characters, in terms of structure, it's just like knowing. For me, it helps to know that I don't have like an eternity. Like a novel, you have all this luxury, you have like, but with the short story, you're kind of, you have this amount of words, and you really have to use them well. And I like that it's both a freedom and a constraint. And with the French, surrealists, especially, who gave themselves all these constraints just so they can come up with something different. So I feel like that in the short story, where you have both, where you kind of seek a kind of freedom in the constraints that you have, in the constraints of not necessarily form, but length of what you can actually call a short story.
Yes, yes, that's so interesting, and it's true that that I really you feel that energy, that propelling forward out of the narrative at the beginning of each story, that sense that this phrase from the epic where we start in the middle
Yes,
and we have to trace backward and forward. It's really there's a way in which there's so much potential energy in those words. I like your comparison to poetry, where each of those words counts, and I think you really feel that as a reader of these stories.
yes,
So just
that's super important to me. Yeah, in terms of, like, in that back and forth. And it's not. I think it's important to realize too that it's not going to work for everybody.
mm,
Not everybody. Some people are like, I never read short stories, and I hope to change that for you. I do.
yes,
If not for me, but for the form, because the form I love very much. But other people like that. So, like, it's like reading a a long article. Sometimes you're like, okay, I could have read a whole book on that subject, but I feel like I get that too.
Yes, and I think it's really, I love the idea of the work of learning how you learn how to write it and to be successful in that form, and that readers need to learn the work of reading it. That there's a that we have to be open to a type of engagement in that short form. And I think many of the professors at George Mason are thinking about that type of reading, and I hope that your readers and those here present today can think of that. You know, how does it feel? How do you engage in these short stories? So it's 7:30, and I just want to remind our audience that if they have questions, they are welcome to ask them. I have a few more myself, but I'd like to bring in one right now from the audience. And it really relates, I think, to the discussion we're having about the form and about the movement that I certainly felt at the start of each of the stories. I kind of wish I could just read the first sentences of a few of them now so people could feel it. But here's this audience question. How do you usually start yourself on a short story? Do you start with a largely thought through plot? Do you ever begin with just a sentence or phrase that jumps into your head?
Yes. So it depends. Sometimes it could be a word, or it could be an image. So, for example, with everything inside, um, that sign just like triggered. I felt like, oh, I could build a whole story around that just so I could use that. And with that inspection, for many years, I had this image in my mind of a man falling. I was,
Mm,
and part of it goes back as far as September 11, 2001, 9/11, where you had what the people they call the jumpers, right? The people, the women who were jumping with their purses as though, I think someone has said they thought they would just get on the ground and keep walking. So I had this image of someone falling
mm,
that was related to all of that, and I just had no idea what to do with it. And then one day, you know, it just the story grew out after many years out of it. But usually, once I have that, I have something that I feel like I can't let go or won't let me go.
mm,
I'll ponder it, but I usually don't start writing until I feel like I have an end. Like,
mm,
so I usually need some perimeter, like a beginning, and the beginning. And I often say, even fiction or nonfiction, I like, if I have a first line, then I'm good. Like, I try to just get to, whether it's from a dream or from a name or from an image, to a first line. And once I feel like that first line can lead me somewhere, then I'll have a beginning and I'll have an end. Because I need something to write towards. And the end can end up being the middle of the story or the middle of the book, but I feel like I need to have something to write forward. And then I write a draft, what Annie Lamont in her book Bird by Bird calls a shitty first draft. so I'll just I'll just liberate myself with that idea of, like, it's going to be bad, but I just want to have a draft. And then I work from my draft. I do a lot of revision. I feel like a lot of my writing really comes alive in revision when you start adding the layers, when I start writing the details. So that's really my process.
Oh, that's really fascinating. Thank you.